Hi there, everybody. Welcome. Hope you've all got your questions ready. We'll be going through those as we do, but we've got some stuff we're going to talk about this time around. We've got the welcome out of the way, so we're going to talk about the merch store real quick because we managed to get that sorted, and then we're going to hand off to Tom, who's going to give us like some info. I don't know if it's a deep dive, Tom, or if it's just an overview of the native backend and what the plans is for that.
Right.
And then we'll open it up for questions, and we'll go from there. So I guess we'll just get straight into it and talk about the merch store. I think you want to just move the slide ahead, Simon. Okay, so we've been working behind the scenes to try and get this done. We spent a huge amount of time trying to find a provider that was going to produce some decent stuff and at a reasonable price. And good quality, and that's actually a lot harder than people think because most of these places are trying to rip you off. But we settled. We thought, okay, rather than not doing anything, let's just pick one and go with it. So we're running off TeePublic, I think they're called. We've redirected the store.monogame.net URL to that store. So if you're after some merch, like t-shirts or stickers, then feel free to avail yourself of what's available. They're pretty good quality. I've bought some myself for testing purposes, as you can see. The stickers are okay. We're going to try and add more stuff, more kind of designs as we go on. But for the time being, it's just plain old MonoGame t-shirts, the Game Run one, which I particularly like, and a few stickers. So if you're interested in anything, if you want some merch or stickers for your laptop, just head over there and help yourself. The foundation does get some of a very, very tiny amount of the proceeds. It's a ridiculously small amount, but you know, things are what they are. So in buying merch, you're helping the foundation out a little bit, and you get a t-shirt or a sticker to go with it. So that's available. So if you want a t-shirt, go for it. And with that, we'll hand over to Tom, I think.
Yay. All right. Hey, everybody. So the question has come up before, what is this native backend? So the native backend is something that we've put together, like after running this project for years, one of the things that we run into a lot of problems with is finding the way to bind some native feature to C#. By native feature, I mean almost everything is a C++ or C API, and we have to talk to it in C#. For a very long time, MonoGame ran on OpenTK, a really old OpenGL binding, but it was a binding. And then we used that for a long time, and then we added in DirectX via SharpDX, which is a C# binding to DirectX, specifically DirectX 11. So we did that, and then eventually we moved to our own native binding, not really, our own binding to OpenGL, and got rid of OpenTK, which had a lot of maintenance problems. And we've kind of cruised in that mode for a long time. We got to consoles. The consoles kind of had their own manually made bindings depending on the console. So we would have a custom API to communicate with the native code, and we would expose that through pinvokes back to C#. And we've used various tools at times to do that conversion, but there were lots of different ways we did it. And all this was kind of chaos because each platform was different. Everything was not uniform. So what we decided to do is make a uniform native API that lets the C# side communicate with C++, without having a different API for every platform. The benefit of that single native backend is that the C++ code in the backend code is what defines how the C# code works instead of the other way around. Currently, the C# code for every platform is very, very different, with different implementations and different ways that things work. So what ends up happening, what ends up happening is the the C# code could have a bug in one platform, like the OpenGL doesn't work properly, but the DirectX does. And it's usually a C# level issue where it might have a different fix that the other one does not. So there's a lot of C# differences that cause differences in behavior. So with the new native backend, the C# code is the same. If you look at what's currently committed in the repo in the develop branch, you'll see that there is one new native platform. That native platform is a common C# that works for the goal of that is for it to work on every platform. Then it talks to a native API that is common for every platform. That's going to be a challenge in itself, but so far we have it basically running on PC using Vulkan as the rendering backend and SDL2 as the windowing and input, and in the windowing and input specifically. And then we have that same native backend API working on Switch, which has its own low-level Switch APIs, but it goes through the same binding. That means you have one C# native DLL and then one C# DLL and one native DLL, essentially, that define how the whole thing works instead of lots of little DLLs and lots of other bindings. It also lets us do some things that were always difficult, like at times we've had to have, like we've needed some libraries, like a library for compressing stuff, or we need a library for reading and writing PNGs and JPEGs. And we've had these conversions where they take some C++ code, run it through a conversion, it generates C# code that's supposed to be fast. And it is pretty fast. It's faster than just doing it manually. But it's still not the full native power that you can have working directly in C++. So now we can put that stuff in our native backend and call it from C# and not have to, have a C# version of something. So it unlocks a lot of possibilities. So that's basically what the native backend is. So where are we at with it? Well, we have some stuff checked into the public repo, but it's not really done. What we put in there is there's a Vulkan implementation that's in there that we contributed from another project. It's not 100% complete, guaranteed it has bugs, but it's in there. I don't think we've made it, we haven't made any sort of NuGet for it or anything, but it's there in the code. You can always reach out to us and we can point you in the right direction, but we need people to try it. So calling out for help, anybody that gives that a try with their project, report any bugs, put them into GitHub issues, and we should be able to start addressing those problems. I think we're in the progress of trying to get that also set up to run the unit tests so that we can start fixing them, because we know that there's some unit tests that are broken. But that's basically where we're at with it at the moment in the public repo. Is the Vulkan support is there, the SDL2 backend is there, windowing, input, graphics, that stuff all works. We don't have an audio system at the moment. And that's something that is a bigger task that we need to address. We have some plans there, but we're not exactly sure how we're integrating it just yet, because there's some complications. Specifically, the bass sound effect stuff, and it's still wanting to support Exact. So that's a big piece that's sort of missing. Once we have that piece, in theory, we can then start publishing a desktop VK platform that is SDL2 Vulkan and the audio system, and would be a package you could actually swap out to use. So that's basically where we're there in the public repo. I'm in the middle of getting... So a month or two back, we had completed a bounty on Xbox to get DirectX 12 support on Xbox. That was completed a couple months ago, but it's only in the Xbox side. Well, we're now pulling that. I'm in the process of pulling that code into the public repo. The DirectX 12 code works on Xbox. It works on PC. I have it running, but I haven't got anything committed yet. My plan is to get starting to commit this stuff into the public repo in the next week or so. It'll be an alternative graphics backend that'll run on Windows, but the same shared code will appear on Xbox as well. That gives us some benefit in that any fix on Windows most likely is a fix on Xbox and vice versa. The only things that won't be from Xbox that'll be in the public repo will be other APIs that are private to Xbox, but the main graphics API will be shared. I guess we'll probably end up sharing the audio as well, depending on how we do that. So yeah, there's some questions there still. So Xbox DirectX 12 will be soon, so we'll have DirectX 12 and Vulkan backends in there. As far as when we plan to switch things, because I know that at the moment, we have OpenGL, we have DX11. We're going to try to maintain all of them for a little while, but at some point, we probably should be cutting off and getting rid of DX11 and getting rid of OpenGL. But I'm not sure when that'll be. There's still needs for it, and this stuff needs to mature a little bit further first. I guess console support, I said before, Switch is already working with this native backend. Xbox, as soon as I get this DirectX 12 moved into the public repo, I should be able to switch over the Xbox stuff to use that as well, so it'll be the same API, same code. PlayStation is the next thing on the list, which shouldn't be too difficult after we have these other ones in place. And then after that, the next big step is applying the same concept of a native API we have it currently in a runtime. The next step is to apply it to the content pipeline. So that instead of having a bunch of different C# lives that we're trying to pull in that are all bindings of native APIs, we'll have a native pipeline API that the low-level processing of content will happen in native code, at least for the stock the stock processors and stuff. For things like for your extensions and people's custom processors, you can do them however you like. But we don't want to break that functionality. And there's some bigger changes we want to do in the pipeline moving forward, but this is kind of the first step to try to get rid of all the you install the pipeline and you have like 50 DLLs. It should cut it down to like 25, but there'll still be DLLs, but it'll be less. And it'll be a little bit easier to maintain for us instead of having lots of different bindings. So that's where we're at in the native backend. Generally, that's our plan moving forward, is to do this across the board on everything. At some point, we probably will be looking at things like the mobile devices. There's some more complications there because the mobile devices depend on the C# Xamarin runtime stuff that is kind of very tightly bound to how the graphics is presented. So it might be a little trickier to move those, but at some point we should move those as well, or at least in some partial way. But yeah, this is a big step forward. Once we get through this process and we have the native backend working properly on PC and it's working on console, we can then start thinking about what the next steps are. If we're going to start removing some of the old implementations for the original, like the existing Windows GL, the existing Windows platform, when are we going to remove those? Not really sure, but we really need to get these stable. So anybody who gets a chance to try the Vulkan backend that's in there now, it's worth getting feedback on that and starting to get it fixed. But it's probably still, I don't know, 3 to 6 months away from, I think, having this all in place and being able to start considering whether it's stable enough to replace the old stuff. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Tom, a quick question from the chat is DirectX 11 maintains support for DX9, but DX12 doesn't. Is that correct?
DX12, I guess it does. It'll run on older hardware, but for the most part, there's not a lot of hardware that doesn't run DX12. I haven't looked at it in a while, but usually the Steam hardware survey is a good place to look for stuff like this. When you look at the Steam hardware survey, let's see what it says, just to be sure about it. Let's see. Almost everything has Vulkan GPUs, and almost everything at this point, I believe, has DX11 or DX12. There is some really old hardware that still only supports DX9 level stuff, but I think that the numbers are so small that it's not super relevant. That's why we're kind of keeping things around for a while, because we're not sure. That said, when we decide to pull the trigger and switch these over, it doesn't mean you have to stop using MonoGame. It just means you have to use the previous version. You continue to use that previous version forever. We're never going to make you leave from it. But we don't want to cut off people when the things actually work, but at the same time, we need to find a way to move forward. So as long as the numbers are small enough, it might make sense for us to start moving some people over from using DX11 hardware, I guess. And I think that DX12 will run on a certain amount of older hardware, but I'm not sure how far. I'd have to investigate further.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I was busy on the chat then. Did we talk about the fact that we need help from the community on all this?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the help that we could use immediately is, having people try the Vulkan backend and give us feedback. If anybody out there has some expertise in Vulkan APIs and stuff like that, guaranteed our implementation is not as optimal as it needs to be, so it could definitely be better. Some of this is just getting this up on the latest, or getting the unit tests up and getting some good stress tests in there to test some things. I have kind of one that we use internally. I probably need to figure out how to publish that so that it's shared with everybody. But yeah, doing some more work on performance and compatibility is pretty important.
Yeah.
We have a question from Ben Makes Games about what we all see as MonoGame's selling points. Personally, I think it's the fact that you do get your hands dirty and you have full control and you have the full source code. It's obviously not initially for anyone who wants to quickly prototype something more complex, say like using Unity or some other tools. But if you want to have full control over how everything in every aspect of your game goes, then that's MonoGame is for you. As I mentioned last week, we are working to create a start kit that would at least initially get people up and running much quicker with a 2D game that they can then hack and create their prototype from, as well as a blank version of that, which will just give you the just the basic scaffolding, and then like a more advanced what's the word I'm looking for? Cornflower Blue. That's the official title. A more advanced Cornflower Blue, but eventually we will also be creating a 3D start kit on the line. Anybody else on the team want to jump in?
What as to why people should use MonoGame instead of Unity or Godot?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I've always had problems with the editor's interface. I think I just work code first, that I always have, rather than kind of drag and drop stuff. But I think that's just me. I think there's a thing about learning their architecture as well. You don't have any control over it. You have to buy into mono behaviors and everything else that goes along with it if you want to use their system. And it's the same with Godot as well. You have to go along with the way they've designed their 3D system. Whereas I think we're just so low level, you can build anything you want on top. I guess you'd agree with that, would you, Tom? Or
yeah, I guess generally.
What would be your caveats, if any?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it a little bit more.
Maybe we come back to that.
Yeah.
We did have a question about why can't we get FMOD support officially implemented?
I mean,
from my point of view, FMOD is a paid service, and that kind of goes that for me it goes against
right
pretty much everything MonoGame stands for, which is free,
right,
open source.
Right, but yeah, and I mean there is already I mean, FMOD provides a C# binding already, so it's there. And that binding does work, and it'll work on consoles as well. So, like, there's not much for us to provide as a native thing. The only thing that we've had to do in the past, and I think we've fixed in the repo, is that you do have to you have to make sure that you can't be running, like on some platforms, you can't be running both sound systems at the same time. So we make sure that the stock sound system doesn't fire up unless you actually try to use it, so that if you're using FMOD, it doesn't get in the way. But other than that, for the most part, use the C# binding that FMOD already provides, and you can use it. It's like we don't have to integrate every single C# library into MonoGame when they already kind of just work.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to take that kind of dependency by having MonoGame sit on top of FMOD, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, I think that works.
Yeah.
There's another question. DX12 Vulkan requires a higher shader model. DX9 syntax needs changing. Did you cover that already, Tom?
Yeah, I replied directly to it. But yes, I mean, to attack a higher shader model, we have to have some slight changes in the shaders. The big change is moving from the old style DX9 style shaders to the newer style. A lot of it's changing it from, calling text 2D and, using text 2D directly to sample versus using a sampler to sample and things like that. For the most part, it's that and changing the shader model definition on the signature. But, all that stuff is kind of like, it's all boilerplate. It's the same on almost everything. There used to be a benefit of targeting a lower shader model that, it'll work with more devices and it'll be slightly more efficient. But all that stuff is gone. For the most part, every platform, you just target the highest shader model and you're done. So yes, you'll have to make some changes to your shader to be able to compile under the higher shader model. But that's really just it. Once you do that, everything else just works. And how we have it set up, we're trying to make sure. I need to look at this a little further, and this is part of working on consoles in a more dedicated fashion, is making it a little bit easier. Like, the effects language that we have is very literal in some of these things. Like, you have to say, well, what shader model is this? It's like, for the most part, there should be a shortcut to say, use the latest shader model. I don't care. Because that's basically what you do in most cases. There's very rarely that you need to target something different. So there's some things we need to change in order to make it a little easier when you get to other platforms. But for the most part, if you write HLSL shaders that target a shader model 5 or 6, it should just work on every platform. Someone had also asked about, like, well, what about supporting something like GLSL? Like, early on our shader support, we had GLSL shaders, and then when we added DirectX, we added HLSL shaders, and for a while we tried to maintain both of them. And the problem is that it's hard to maintain both of them. It splits your community and people writing one shader or another shader. If you look at something like Godot, if you look at Unity, if you look at Unreal Engine, they all pretty much say, hey, we have one shader model and we cross-compiled everything else. That's pretty much how the industry has gone. And for us, I believe, because of our roots in DirectX and XNA, and just the way that Unreal does it in other platforms, you kind of want to go with an HLSL style language instead of a GLSL style language. So I think that we're sticking down our path of a single, you write an HLSL shader, it cross-compiles it to everything. Could we go the other direction and write a Vulkan shader and cross-compile to everything? Yeah, you could. But I think because of the history of the project, we're sticking with HLSL, just because there's so much that already works out there. And as small as we are as a group and as difficult it is to work on things, it seems like the better priority is to focus on other issues than trying to maintain two different shader languages and make it all work. It's hard enough with one. So, yeah, I think we're sticking to HLSL as the language.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Somebody was asking about video playback, though I do find it surprising that somebody would choose a different platform just because of the video playback. But
I mean, some games require it, right? And we've always had this tricky spot because of it. In the native API, I kind of wrote something a little different as the starting point for things. And I think it's a better implementation. We just haven't fully proven it out. Basically, the native API has, let me make sure I remember exactly what I called it, just to be sure. But basically, instead of supporting, basically what we want to do is support a video decoder and audio decoders, and that's basically how the API is set up in the native side. So basically, you say, hey, here's a file, give me a video decoder that'll decode this video, and it returns you a video decoder interface, essentially not an interface but an object to work with, and then you can call it to get frames of data, and you can call it to get audio, chunks of audio, and then you can push that out through the audio system and the video into a texture. So we have a better API, I think, to support more codecs and more functionality than what we had previously. So the plan is to add support into that native backend for different video codecs and stuff. I think, did I add one already? I might have already added one at least. Let me double check. I think I might have added one. And it might have just been something simple.
I think you might have added one for testing purposes.
Yeah, I mean,
remember that.
And that stuff is kind of it exists in. Actually, no. What I did was, the stuff that's in the public repo still is just kind of generic stuff, and it doesn't actually do anything at the moment. But it returns the right APIs and everything else. The actual implementation that we have is in the Nintendo Switch implementation, is where we have an actual audio decoder and an actual video decoder. So that's where we kind of tested out the API. The plan next is to expand these to support some basic audio and video decoding. Theora is not a good solution because it works fine for small videos. The second you try to do any kind of high quality video, 2K or 4K, it falls down. There's not enough performance there for it to work. So we really need to have a good implementation of decoding video that is fast. There's a lot of different libraries out there. So we're going to pick at least one as our primary. Most likely it'll be some form of MP4 kind of decoder, just because that's the thing that's common. It might be that there's one open source one that's out there, but it's a native API, a native library. We would directly link to it in our native DLL for the back end, and then we try to use that same library across every platform if possible. Yeah. But we could also plug in some more.
Okay, there was a question about web support, whether we would ever consider re-adding web support. I know we did have like a really hacky version at one point, but it was not a very good implementation, if I remember rightly. And I know there's a fork of MonoGame KNI which has web support, but I don't know where we sit with that and how it fits into the native side of things.
Yeah, I mean, web support has gone a lot of different ways, right? Like at this point, it seems like there's very little desire for web support. There was for a while. There was like some really hardcore push for web support on everything, and I think that's everything's kind of pulled back. I don't see it as being as big of a need anymore. But like I believe like Unreal had some web support, and then I think it went away. Because you get more and more advanced stuff, it becomes harder to do it on the web. And I think a lot of people dropped off from that for that reason. Could we continue to support it? We could. I don't know how that combines with our native backend at all. Obviously, the native backend is not going to run there, but there might be a way to either translate or write a new backend specifically for web that would just work off the same APIs.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be the challenge, is to do that. And it's totally possible. Would we like to have it? It'd be great to have it. It's just probably not a high priority for us at the moment, at least not currently. Once we get our everything in order with the consoles and the new native backend, then we can start thinking about, well, can we add a web support backend as well?
Yeah, I mean it's quite. I think it's quite popular on itch.io because you can publish web-based games there. So, but you can't do them on Steam or Good Old Games, I don't think either. So, Yeah, I think
Right.
something for the future, perhaps.
Yes.
Right. Dom, any questions that you've seen?
I was just responding to one and I scrolled down, so I'm lost
Okay,
track.
that's
I'm
fine.
just going back now.
Right. So we have. Oh, this is a nice question. Is MonoGame still committed to being a drop-in replacement for XNA? Some things like the content pipeline still feel a little dated. I appreciate Microsoft's commitment to backwards compatibility. We're not Microsoft, by the way.
Yeah.
I also appreciate frameworks aren't afraid to break things in order to modernize. Yeah. So where does MonoGame fall? So where do we fall on that? Like from complete backwards compatibility to we're going to break stuff. I think we're somewhere in the middle, probably.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I believe that API-wise, we're completely compatible. The same APIs exist in both. You can basically take an XNA project, remove the XNA reference, add a MonoGame reference, and it should generally compile without any changes, at least on Windows for sure. As far as the content, we can load a lot of XNA content. It's when you get to shaders that things get a little weird. You can't really load an old XNA shader into this because it just shader systems are different. But textures and everything else will load directly. You could rebuild the content using the MonoGame pipeline. We have the functionality to import a XNA content project and convert it to our own content processing or content format and compile that. So that should work. So yeah, I mean, we try to maintain that as much as possible. We go out of our way not to just, well, we're just going to rewrite this API completely, so it's just different. Mostly because I don't see a giant win for us in that regard. In fact, we're kind of taking some steps back on some stuff. Some years back, we removed some APIs that were kind of old and stinky and not great APIs, but they provided some functionality, and we're looking to add some of those back in order to give us some commonality and improve them in order to give us some common APIs that can work across different all the platforms, including console. I'm talking specifically about things like save game stuff. And adding that stuff back is going to help us, I think. But those APIs are not ideal for a modern platform, so we're trying to figure out ways to keep the existing API, leave it how it works, but side by side add improvements to the API so that you can target a better API if you like. For me, having XNA compatibility is important because we still have people come at us with trying to bring old XNA games to consoles. So for us, having the compatibility is worth it. 100% compatibility is not necessary. It just needs to be a level where you're not having to rewrite the entire game in order to get it to run on the platform. A couple things here and there being off is not a big deal. But generally, you want to be as compatible as possible, and that includes functionality. Having the same functionality on multiple working. Like if you call this API to do the same thing, otherwise you're going to have problems. So yeah, we want to maintain compatibility at least while we're still on this XNA, 3x, or MonoGame 3x. We want to keep compatibility. The future is probably breaking that compatibility and changing the API in a more radical way, but we're not there yet. So for right now, we're still maintaining XNA APIs, and there's not a plan to break them, right now.
There was a question about the VS 2022 extension not being updated. If I remember correctly, we have a version that's available on the repos, but it's not been made public yet, and will hopefully go out with the next 3.83 release. Anybody else got any other info on that?
I don't work with his plugins very much, so I can't say.
You have to. Which is this the Visual Studio extension?
Yes, a question from Aristotle, actually.
Yeah, you fixed that, didn't you?
Yep. That
yeah.
Should be.
So I hope you fixed it.
Well,
got merged.
So. Yeah.
So next release that should work.
If you want to get if you want to have a play with it, Aristotle, ping me and I'll send you the link. But it's publicly available, just not released. Let me see if we've got any other questions here.
We have one about better 3D support, whether we're going to introduce things like metal and lighting shaders or shadow shaders. I know we've discussed that. I know you and I have discussed this on a few occasions. There was something I was kind of interested in trying to see if we could build in animation support rather than it being something that you had to do yourself. But I know there's lots of reasons why we shouldn't do that, but there's also like convenience reasons why we should. So I don't know.
Yeah, so as far as shaders are concerned, there is a desire to add more shader functionality, and that's something that we can do. We're trying to get this native backend in place and get everything settled there and get the consoles back up to speed. And then at that point, we're going to dive into that. The trickiness with that is we need to make sure that we support all the platforms. So we have to kind of unify, in some way that works, that'll work properly. Because ideally, if you write a geometry shader on Windows, it should work for you on Switch, without having to rewrite the whole thing or start over. So that's the trickiness of it. So it requires, knowing all the platforms and all the issues involved. So it's a kind of a big task, and there might be things we can't fix, but we want to try to make it as compatible as possible. But that is the plan: is to add the other shader stages in. But we want to do it in a way that's kind of unified. There have been other pushes to kind of do this in some PRs that were submitted. And I would have loved to have merged them, but they didn't solve our problems on console, and they were not really heading in I think some of them weren't heading in the right direction as far as how we wanted to see that happen. Plus, there has been some internal discussion about also supporting runtime compilation of shaders on the platforms that do allow it, specifically on Windows and PC. You don't want to do it on mobile, really, just because of the overhead of it, and you can't do it on some consoles. So you have to have offline shader generation. That has to be the primary path. But at least for development purposes on your desktop, having runtime shader compilation is good. So we're also reworking it from that perspective, where we want the shader pipeline basically to be hostable and both are usable both from runtime, specifically for development, not necessarily for shipping your game, but in theory it would work, and also have it work offline. So there's a lot of big considerations there to make this work, but the shader, we will be adding the other shader stages. There was the second part of that. It was
well, the second part was me waffling on about animate models and animations in models.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big question about how much do we integrate into MonoGame versus stuff that's external. I mean, end of the day, MonoGame was just rendering things, or playing audio, or it's really the platform level code.
Yeah.
But it does have a little bit of extra code, like we have code for some spline interpolation, and we have some code for, just basic math code and things like that. But it doesn't build any further from there. As long as we don't integrate any sort of basic like we should aim at some basic animation support, not at something that is super advanced, because the super advanced stuff changes all the time. But basic enough that you could ship something that gives you straightforward support wouldn't be bad to have. But we should do it in a way that doesn't, force you to use it. You can still use another library. I don't know if that means a MonoGame extensions kind of project, or if it means it's still part of the core. I'm not sure exactly.
I've been thinking about this recently. I've always envisaged like a community maintained, because we've got MonoGame Extended, which is a brilliant project, and it just adds to the MonoGame ecosystem. And it'd be lovely if there's like a 3D version of that for people who are doing game jams and stuff like that. So they just pull in a 3D extended thing, and then you get your lighting. You get like a default lighting model and shadows and animation stuff. But it's not necessarily something you want to ship your game with, because it's very basic, but it might just be enough to get you going. But I don't know if that's something we could kick off.
Yeah, the problem with all that stuff is that, once you go to 3D, it becomes exponentially more complex. There's a million ways to do shadows. There's a million ways to do animation. There's a million ways to organize your scene, to do scene culling. There's a ton of different things that we could address. But if we address them, then we're going a very, very, very specific direction. So how we do it, we need to make sure that it doesn't impact the core of it. So that people can still have alternative implementations. We could just provide one. Our hope was always that these implementations would pop up around MonoGame as the ecosystem would evolve, where people would write, "Hey, I wrote a lighting system that works with MonoGame. I wrote, an animation system that works with MonoGame," and it would be separate pieces that people would come in. We didn't want to build like, well, here's MonoGame. It's the be all end all one engine. We're not Unreal Engine that has everything. We're not Unity that is trying to have everything, or Godot that's actually trying to do the same thing. We wanted to be different on purpose. So it is mostly just following on just the direction XNA was heading. They did add a little bit more. It's interesting. They decided, the XNA team originally, I don't know why, they decided, we're not going to add an animation library in there, but we're going to provide a sample that has some animation support, and 3D model rendering with animation support in it. Here's a pipeline, here's how you add pipeline extensions, here's how you would do that. They decided that early on. I don't know if they would have changed directions later on and added it as a core element, but they didn't make it part of the core of XNA when they had an option to do that. They kind of said, well, this should be separate.
Yeah, Sean Hargreaves has some interesting blog posts on 3D and animation.
Yeah.
If you go and read his blog, it goes into some quite detail.
Right. If you can still find it.
It's still up there, I think.
Is it? Okay, well,
yeah.
I think a lot of the stuff that he used to have that was hosted on Microsoft's blog site has disappeared, but I think he reposted it on his own site, maybe.
Got his own stuff. I did have it open. Yeah, can't find it. Well. Okay, have we got anything else? Dom, can you see any other questions?
There's one question that said about, will we remove the content pipeline? Nope, not an option. It's never going to happen. Guess what? Even Unreal has a content pipeline. Unity has a content pipeline. Godot has a content pipeline. They're adding more to it. You need to process content offline a lot of times. You wouldn't ship your game and have it compile the C++ code when you first run it. It's the same thing. You need to pre-process your content, in order to not waste the person that's running the game's time. So content pipeline is going to stay. We're trying to remove some requirements to use it. We're adding some more functionality that will make it a little less required. But that's really only if you want to have the slow path. That's what we're talking about, having some runtime shader compilation, but it will not work everywhere. Like, hands down, there are consoles that cannot compile a shader at runtime. It's not allowed. It's not a feature. So you could use it on PC, and you could use it on Mac, and you could use it, even though it'll be slow, you can use it on mobile, and you can use it maybe on one console, even though it'll be slow. You can't use it on all consoles, so it's just not an option. Say, we'll just compile it at runtime. That's the naive approach to, like, oh, we'll just compile it all at runtime. It's fine. That's not how that works. If you have an experience with it, you'll know that you can't do that.
Yeah, I've always, one of my prime examples was when I was working on Skulls of the Shogun. Mm-hmm. And without the content pipeline, without texture compression and all of that stuff, that game would not have run on mobile. Period. Yeah. It's just too many graphics. The GPUs just couldn't handle it.
Right.
And whenever people say, "Oh, yeah, you don't need content pipeline," I always think back to those days. And at that point, we didn't have decent texture compression. So,
right.
We had to hack that in. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to envision where you were, in the past, but, you don't need a content pipeline until you figure out, oh, I need a content pipeline. Once you figure it out, it's like, oh, well, I did need that. I just didn't realize it. You just have to have that experience first to know it. But there are other things like, one of the problems with the shader compilers is that they're slow, and to make shaders run really fast, it takes a lot of CPU power to optimize that shader to be as fast as possible. And you just don't want to do that when you're starting up your game. Like if you want your games on console to start up with a loading bar saying, "Hey, we're compiling all your shaders," and you have to watch it for 20 minutes. You could do that, but what's the point of that? Your convenience as a developer right now, it's not about that. So the future is not, we're going to compile all our shaders at runtime. The future is compiling offline. That is always going to be how that works. So the content pipeline is staying. It's not moving. It's not going away. We're going to make it less of a sticking point, especially on PC, where most of these complaints come from, so that you don't have to deal with it, or you can avoid it, or it compiles it on the fly, for you. But when you start getting to, consoles and other platforms where you realize you need it, we want to make sure that even if you make that decision that I don't want to use it, that it's easy to fix that problem later, so that you're not like, oh crap, I have to rewrite everything because I was wrong. I do need to compile my stuff offline. So we want to make sure that's as simple as possible once you realize that hey, I actually need this.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. We got anything else?
Let's see. Looking to see if there's any other questions in here. I'm way far behind on this list.
We've answered a lot of them, I have to say.
As far as like compiling, one of the questions that came up is like compiling shaders like on Linux and stuff like that. Yes, I mean, part of updating our content pipeline or updating the shader support is to move to a different shader compiler that we can use on multiple platforms, so that you don't have to deal with that issue, specifically.
Oh, there's right, okay. Would the foundation ever consider recommending third-party tooling like MonoGame Extended? But just have an official recommendation. I personally, I don't have as me. I don't have a problem with recommending third-party libraries. They would have to obviously stand up to the ethos behind MonoGame, in my opinion. So open source and free,
Right.
with the right license. But yeah, I mean, MonoGame Extended is an excellent toolkit, and I don't see any problem with working together to do that. Hopefully, everybody else agrees with that.
Yeah, in general, what I don't want to do is say, well, we bless this library, but not that one.
Yeah.
Like we like this guy, but we don't like that guy. We don't want to play favorites or anything like that. So, but I think some of that is also like the on the website we have the showcase, which is showcasing games, like being able to showcase or having a collection of like, these are libraries that work with MonoGame, and point people to the right things. I think that would be pretty powerful to improve the ecosystem, and I can see us doing that. If you want to call that endorsing it, fine, but we, as long as it works and it's not something that's a crypto scam, or something that's like, well, you have to pay for all this. I mean, even if it's a paid library, if you want to charge for your library, fine. We're not going to say, well, the paid library, we're going to support that one, but not the one that's unpaid. Like, we don't care. You can do whatever you want with that stuff. But I think that maybe having, I don't know what we'd call it. It wouldn't be a showcase. It would be something else. It's almost like here's a bunch of libraries that are compatible with MonoGame that you could take a look at, and really, I don't know, it would be, maybe do it as some sort of ratings where people can, rate the library or something like that. I don't know how that overlaps with GitHub itself. There might be a way for us to do something to kind of build this, an easy way for someone, if somebody comes to the website and says, hey, great, I got MonoGame, well, like, how do I do this? What libraries are out there for doing this? Instead of having them just search, well, go to Google and ask, which, is, harder to do nowadays.
Okay.
Maybe there's a different way to do it.
Yeah, I've just seen it. So MonoGame Forms apparently is on the showcase page, but that's the only third-party library that we have apparently. I think basically the answer to that question, if you maybe we need another category. So
well, there is a category called library in there, and there's one thing in it. And maybe it needs to be a separate thing entirely.
Yeah, but we can. In the meantime, we could accept PRs, I guess, if people, because that's what we do with the showcase page, isn't it?
Right. But I think that what we really need to do is have a separate. It's not a showcase, if think of it from the point of view of a new developer just using it. Great. I mean, where can I find a library that gives me animation so I can do animation in MonoGame? They're not going to say, oh, let me go look in the showcase page. They're not going to think the showcase has anything to do with that. So where would they think to look is the question, right? That's how we would name it or present it, like extensions or libraries or find some nice way of saying it that would guide people to the right place, and make that something that's easy for them to find so they can do that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think we need to have something different for that and be a great feature to have on the website. And it would just link to the project, which would most likely link to their GitHub, and then from there they can do whatever they need to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Tom as well. My only concern with officially endorsing something is that I think if we officially endorse something, we'd have to make sure it works with every version they release. It would be my thing. So I think just saying these are things that we know work with MonoGame, as Tom mentioned, is a nicer solution.
Yeah, and end of the day, it's going to be up to the developer of that library to make sure it works everywhere. We could at least tag it in some way, saying like we know it works on these platforms.
Yeah,
and it'll have to be self. Yes, I guess so. Yeah, I mean the question is who maintains that. That's the problem. I ran into this the other day with an Unreal project. Like I was trying to install an Unreal thing off Fab, and it wouldn't install on Unreal 5.5 because it's not tagged to support Unreal 5.5, even though it totally runs on Unreal 5.5, but no one's gone back to tag it to say, oh, it does support this. And it's like, who does that work? Somebody has to do it. Epic's not doing it, even though they have money to do it. It's up to the developer to figure that out. So it's tricky. We have to figure out how that's going to happen, but it's going to have to be community run. There's not enough of us, and there's not enough funding to go around to have someone dedicated to, we're going to need to check all these libraries and make sure they all work with this. It's going to be difficult, And if we start tagging them and say, oh, this one works, then eventually they'll go stale, and someone won't update the tag and tell you whether it works or not. So there's a lot of complications to make that work. It seems really easy to say. It's hard to make it actually work in practice, right?
Yeah, I just spotted a question we overlooked. Question: will the buggy sound effect implementation be fixed? Currently, you can't loop music properly. I believe this is to match XNA, but it's a big problem.
Right. We need more specifics on what you mean.
Yeah.
If you mean on some platforms it does not loop seamlessly, then yeah, there's some issues with there in some cases, but it depends on I think it was tied to the audio format in particular, and I think it was an ADP, an MSP, PCM thing. Yeah,
one of them pads, doesn't it? It pads in blocks.
Yeah, I think so, and that's what partially causes the problem. And I think it doesn't need to do that, or if there's a trick to making that work. But the first step is putting together a good bug report, saying, are you going to fix sound effects so it works? That doesn't help us. I can't. What's broken? I don't know. We need details. So if there's an issue already out there for that issue, bump it. Write a comment, bump that issue up. if there isn't one, let's put one in there and give us something better than, it doesn't work. We need some more specifics. Like, what are you trying to do? We don't need a ton of sample code. We don't need you to write a project for us. What we just do need is like, well, what case are you talking about? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to play? What's the audio file? How are you trying to loop it? What's the format you're targeting? Things like that, so we can kind of address it more specifically.
Samples are brilliant. I had a bug report in my day job today, and the guy in question, I said, file an issue if you could, and he filed an issue, and there was a sample which he'd put on GitHub, so I could just clone it. And within about 5 minutes of him posting the bug, I'd already repoed it, because the whole thing was right there. I know that's difficult to do sometimes, but as a maintainer, that's one of those things that's really important. It really helps move things along.
Yeah.
And we've already got a fix. So the guy reported the bug like this morning, and one of our team has got a PR up fixing it by this evening. And that's going to go out in the next release. So ideally, that's the kind of stuff we want to go for. But I know it's not always possible.
Yeah, it's not required. It's always really nice to have something that already shows exactly where it's broke. Do this and it will break. But giving us more details than it's broken is the important part. I'm going back through some of these.
I think we're probably going to have to wrap this up now, I think, because we've been going for 57 minutes.
Oh. Any
I know
questions?
Simon needs to go and get himself a hot chocolate or something.
Yeah.
I've already skipped hamstring.
Too early.
Simon, Aristotle says you need to review his tutorial docs.
He knows.
Right.
Okay. I think we'll probably call it there if everyone agrees. I don't think we've got anything else to talk about.
This is over. Any other question? Things. Chat and get back to them. Bounties next month. Get on with our day jobs.
There'll be some more bounties, guaranteed.
Yeah. Any questions that we have for this one, we'll probably try and answer either offline or in the next one.
Yeah, I'm going to see if there's any more in here to answer and reply directly in the chat.
Yeah.
I suppose the question is only be voting for this. Nothing be specifically a.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Cool. Thanks everyone.
Yep.
Bye everybody.
We need the bounty for exit move.
Oh no.
Have a great week all.
All right. Later, everybody. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.